The second screencast for Unit 1 deals with objectives 8 and 9. So how do investigators search the crime scene to find evidence, and then once that evidence is found, how do they package and preserve it so that it can get back to the crime lab and be analyzed? So the preliminary exam of the crime scene looks a little bit like this. The lead investigator is named, and that person will start the process of taking a look at the area, figuring out the boundaries of the crime scene, the perpetrator's entry and exit paths, and then an initial walkthrough of the scene to kind of figure out what has happened, the best guess of what has happened, and then a strategy to examine and document what's going on. The search for evidence has to be thorough and systematic, because the problem is, if it's just completely haphazard, things can be overlooked. So the search pattern that's selected will normally depend on the location of the scene, the size of the scene, and how many people are available to search. So we have 4 different search patterns you need to familiarize yourself with, and they look exactly like they sound. The spiral search method is here. You can start in the middle and spiral out, or start at the outside and spiral in. The strip or the line search, people line up shoulder to shoulder and move in one direction across the crime scene, and then they can turn around and come back as well. The grid method, people go side to side and then up and down in a grid pattern. And then you have the quadrant or zone search. So the quadrant or zone search, you're dividing this up, the search area, into 4, in this case, 4 different quadrants. This one is the only search method that requires more than one person. Here, hold on a minute. I'm going to use shorthand. So more than one person. Can't read that very well, I apologize, but quadrant or zone requires more than one person. Obviously, the investigator can't overlook any type of evidence. Physical evidence can be a huge object that is difficult to transport back to the crime scene, back down to the most microscopic of evidence that can also be difficult to transport back to the crime scene. Evidence can be clearly visible, or it can be detected through examination of things collected at the crime lab. It's important to collect possible carriers of what we call trace evidence, really small pieces of evidence that might go undetected. Clothing, vacuum sweepings, and fingernail scrapings can all hold trace evidence. If there's a deceased victim, an autopsy can lend some clues to what's going on. A medical examiner or a coroner will examine the victim to establish a cause and manner of death. Tissues and organs can be checked for pathology and toxicology. We're going to be getting into autopsies in a little greater detail later on in this unit. So arrangements between the examiner and the investigator need to be made to secure items from the body for examination, for analysis. Things that are collected and sent to the forensic laboratory include victims' clothing, fingernail scrapings, hair, blood for DNA typing, vaginal, anal, and oral swabs in sex-related crimes, recovered bullets from the body. How is evidence packaged and preserved? Different item or similar items collected can need to be placed in separate containers. That prevents damage through contact and also prevents cross-contamination. forceps, they look like tweezers, can be used to pick up small items if a gloved hand is too cumbersome to pick that up. Plastic pill bottles with pressure lids are good containers for small pieces of evidence, hairs, glass fibers, smaller trace evidence. Small stuff is easily transported in those pill bottles. Manila envelopes, screw cap glass vials, or cardboard pill boxes are good for most trace evidence encountered at crime sites. Ordinary mailing envelopes should not be used because powders and fine particles can leak out of the corners. So the corners need to be folded in on one another. Small amounts of trace evidence can also be packaged in a folded paper. There's not any of that other stuff available. You can fold a paper into what's called a druggist fold. Remind me in class and I'll show you what a druggist fold looks like. Druggist is an old-fashioned term for a pharmacist. All of these containers are good for most trace evidence, but two things warrant special attention, two frequent finds. So first of all, things that are blood-stained, if they're stored in an airtight container, then mold can grow more easily because of accumulated moisture, and that can destroy the blood through decomposition. Then that's not able to be analyzed. In this case, you need to package blood-stained materials in something that's breathable, paper specifically. Wrapping paper, manila envelopes, paper bags are good packaging materials there. In the case of a fire scene, if fire residues are not stored in airtight containers, potential accelerants like gasoline or kerosene or alcohol, whatever that could have been used to start the fire deliberately, might evaporate. So in this case, it's actually the opposite situation. You want to use an airtight container, like a paint canister, that would keep all of those chemicals, those volatile chemicals, from evaporating.